Hello, hello. This is David Workman and Troy Elliott from Data Mosaic, and we're here today to do an informal demo of Slickgrid component for Servoy that we've been working our tail ends off on. A number of issues with Servoy's default grid, and I'll leave that for another demo. But today we're going to show you the key integration demos for Slickgrid in the proof of concept. Performance, obviously, but also a cool thing that we're really happy about is the Servoy IDE integration and how easy we are to put this in a Servoy development workflow. So, Troy, I am going to flip over to your screen now and let Troy take it away. He's the coding genius making all this work. And before I do that, I'm going to brag about what Troy's doing here a little bit, and that is so Slickgrid seems to be the obvious solution to replace things out, but there's certainly some challenges for being able to implement this. A lot of coding. So if you're thinking about doing this yourself, we certainly give you some heads up on what you'll be facing. But certainly mapping Slickgrid configuration requirements to Servoy objects is part of this IDE integration that Troy is going to show you. So it makes it as easy to use and set up in developer environment for Servoy developers. And it's pretty transparent from smart client to web client. And results is amazing performance, which is the other thing we'll show you today. All right, so now back over to you, Troy. Sorry about that. Okay, I got your screen up now.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is a simple Servoy form, and to specifically look at the table view down here. This is a standard Servoy table. What I want to show you is how to turn that into a grid more along the lines of this one, which is a Slickgrid table. And again, at this point, there really isn't very much difference when you look at them because they're skinned very similarly. You really see the difference when we start throwing in a lot more rows than 2 or 3. So, one more good look. We've got a simple Servoy form with a method attached to this arrow that takes you to another part of the solution. So, back to Servoy Developer, and here's that parent form. I go to the contact form. So you can see here that it is, in fact, a standard table view. And the one thing that I'm going to add is a design time property. Call this view type. And what we're doing right now is I'm going to make it a slick view. We also have a slick edit, but for right now we're just showing off the slick view. Now at this point, Servoy doesn't really know about, or actually it does know about the design time property, but there is some magical sauce happening behind scenes to hook everything up. So in order to do that, I'm going to not log out. I'm just going to close my private browsing window, fire it up again, and relog back in. So at this point right here, Servoy went through, found all the forms that were tagged as Slickgrid, and translated them into a Slickgrid form. Okay, here we go. The same form, looking very similar to what you had before, except that this is now running Slickgrid. I don't know if it's useful, but we can go look at the markup and see that is this grid canvas. We are actually running a Slickgrid here, and it's very clean markup as far as markup goes. Leave it at that.
A reminder to yourself when I ask you to go through that special sauce quotes at the end of the demo, what you're doing with it.
So another styling type thing that you can do with a Slickgrid is similar to Servoy. You've got on render events. The Slickgrid, that's the one thing that does not get translated directly, but say you do want to have some row background coloring or something like that, you can write a Servoy method that looks very much like an old school row background color calculation, and that'll come through onto the Slickgrid. So
part of the automatic mapping of metadata from Servoy IDE into Slickgrid configuration objects, which is a fairly substantial job.
I mean, everything's sortable here. The columns are draggable. Probably whack out the sizing a little bit. Yeah, it's one thing I'm still working on. Notice how it reset everything to its default size. But I want to see the. Oh, let's go over and look at lots of rows. Yeah.
Sure. Before one last summary on that is that's how easy it is to design a Slickgrid form for web client, and Smart Client still works per normal, right?
Correct.
So all it is a design time property you add in, and away it goes.
Correct, and it's as I'm changing records, it is updating the Slickgrid with the correct data, and so on.
Yeah, excellent. All right, now for performance. This is what Slickgrid is for.
Okay, so we've got here. Why don't I flip on? Okay, so we're loading in. This is a standard Servoy table. I didn't count there, but it was probably about 3 seconds for it to pull in. Notice there's 200 records in the found set, so the first chunk of the found set is loaded, 29,000 records total. It took, what, three and a half seconds to pull in, I'd say maybe the first 60 or 70 records. Now we're paging in a little bit more. So, I'm not going to change the selection. We'll just leave it where it is. And I'm going to click over here on the Slickgrid version of this. And at this point, why don't we just count? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Should be done here momentarily. 9. Okay, so 9 seconds, and it looped over the entire found set and pulled back, and everything here is local now. So you notice as I'm clicking around, I can scroll any which way, and the data is all here. Now that initial performance hit looping over the found set, that is something that will flip around to something a little bit more paged, or just use SQL queries to hit the back end. I'm not sure of the exact technology there, but we'll get rid of that initial hit at load time. And just one final thing that's a nice plus. So I've selected record 13,000. Now if I had scrolled all the way down using a standard Servoy grid, clicked on record 13,000, and then gone away to, say, any other form, why don't I go back and see what would happen? There you go. It puts me right back up to the first record. My selected record is, I don't know, a couple thousand scroll downs until I get to the selected record. However, if I go to the Slickgrid version, and again, we are looping over all the records. Notice how my scroll is set correctly. The record I have selected is in the grid. You can see it, and you can take off seeing what you're actually working on.
Now, this is something that you put in on top of the Slickgrid implementation for support, right?
Not too much. I mean, Slickgrid has its own methods to set the scroll position. So I pretty much just scrolled it to a few records before the one that was selected.
Yeah, you're tracking where it's at, and when you come back to
yeah.
it. Okay. And to go back while I'm talking, is that initial load in right now, the speed hit is because Troy just did it an easy way. He looped through the found set to load all those records in, and that's what's taking the time. I mean, going through 30,000 records through a found set is not fast. Whereas if you use a direct SQL query, you just boom, bring it all back. So there is one of the challenges of implementing client-side components with Servoy is how do you get the initial data in to begin with? And certainly with Slickgrid, where you can handle millions of rows, once that data is there, how do you want to get that data in to begin with? And we have a couple different ways we're going to be doing that, and all of which will not be the found set on the final implementation, unless you're just using related records that are a couple hundred or so at max. Did I get that about right?
Yep.
All right, performance. We covered everything. This is Slickgrid. There's tons of advanced features, and the upshot of this is that currently we need to get client applications running a lot faster in Servoy. Web client, we made a huge effort in the past year to move completely from Smart Client to Web Client, and it took a lot of effort to make Servoy Web Client look good, and then now we're really tackling some of the real bottlenecks for speed. And so we're pretty excited about this. It's taken a ton of work in terms of just making it all work smoothly and repeatable, and for many different projects. But I think the end result is definitely worth it. Just anybody can come along and Servoy designer set things up, and then go ahead and not worry about it from there. Troy did all the worrying for you. Anything else, Troy?
Yeah, that's about it. Did you want to talk about code at all?
Oh yeah, thanks for the reminder. We have a lot of cool features coming out with Slickgrid, like sub summaries and stuff, right on these huge grid component features that you can now do with Slickgrid, and so we'll be doing demos with that in the future. But we won't show those here today. What we will talk about, let's talk about how you make all this the magic sauce, so the developer doesn't have to worry about it.
Alrighty.
I have to say that some of this, you use solution model, right? Servoy solution model for a lot of that to spoof out all the metadata. I might get ahead of you here.
I actually don't remember what I called it, so I'll just go find my little Slickgrid scope. There we go. Okay, so there is a method that is fired, for lack of a better place, let's just say it's on solution startup. And what I do is I grab all the forms, loop over them to find all of the forms that have a design time property of view type, and specifically right now we're talking about slick view. At that point, I grab the form and I create a new form with the same name as the old one, __ slick. It could be anything, but that's just an easy way for me to know what the form is going to be called. And I base it off of a new form, or a different form rather, which is this one, a small form with one label on it. The label I'm using to get a div so that I can fill it with Slickgrid stuff. And then copy over all of the methods. Here was the properties on the original form to the new form instance I created. Setting a flag that this is in fact a Slickgrid. What else? Then copy all the components. By components, that would be labels, fields, and whatnot. Right now, only pulling across stuff in the body. Later, we'll bring over other stuff as well, but bring everything from top left to bottom right as it appears on your form, and set it up with some properties. What the ID is, if it has a title text, how wide, yada, yada, yada. Then there's a little bit of manipulation here to, say, format dates or bring across images.
Like you can put a label with an image on a Servoy table and I'll come across, right?
Right. So that's what, say, this minus button right here. It's a Servoy media field that is, if we look at the code for that, it's some inline CSS pulling the image directly from the media library.
Yeah.
Some setting of the column widths. What else is interesting in here?
I think all the geeks out there are going crazy about right now. This is good stuff. Yeah, please tell us, what's the regex thing? I see some regex.
Just cleaning up some junk. Yeah, the basic idea is to copy everything from the form that you flagged onto this new form, and then at runtime, that is the second component where everything gets converted into a Slickgrid. So you see this grid columns, grid methods. These are form variables on our new form, and then I guess bring my Solution Explorer back. When the form is shown, it looks at those form variables and creates the Slickgrid.
Can you pull up one of those form variables and do those get translated to the client side as configuration objects? Slickgrid configuration objects?
You mean over in Chrome?
Yeah.
More or less, yeah.
So all of Servoy Designer metadata basically comes over and looks like this.
ds dot. Hey, where's my code completion? Am I in the wrong spot? Scopes. Oh, my bad.
Hey. I was going to say DS, right?
Grid table. Okay, so here's an instance of all of the different slick grids. I don't actually know which one is the one I'm looking at. I could look that up, but we'll just pick one at random. And in here, I can get the columns. Oops, gotta run it. Okay, and it actually could be this one. So these three objects are the objects that make up the grids. So is it this one? Yeah, it is. We're looking at this one. First is the ID. Second one is the field called test original, and the third field, if you will, is an image, and that's what it's pulling out of the media library.
And that DS action there is actually the name of the method to be run.
Yeah, the DS action is the name of the method that's getting run there.
So it's already attached to that minus sign object up there.
Yeah,
and
I guess I could get rid of that DS action. It's not actually doing anything at this point. It was earlier in the process. Right. If I hit the minus button, it'll say, do I really want to delete it? Yes or no. And this is firing a Servoy method back in Servoy. If I say yes or nay, yay or nay, it'll delete that row.
Okay, so we're getting into the next demo a little bit there, but
yeah.
All right, so sorry to interrupt. I think we want to look at your code a little bit more, and then
Servoy side or client side?
Oh, the Servoy side there. Finish down to the end of that baby, and then go grab a beer.
Yeah, so copying over the methods, copying over form variables, the events. Any of the events that were on the original form marked to be copied, they get copied on across. So if it's a scoped method, just pull it across. Otherwise, create a new method on the form with the same code of the former one. Okay, so that was the big loop at the beginning. Then there's two types of forms. In this square right here, this form is not on a tab panel, but yet when I come back to it, the Slickgrid fires up. The other example is a form that is on a tab panel, and anytime you switch a tab or the parent form's record change, you want the child Slickgrid to be updated. So that's the next block of code, loops over and attaches methods on the parent form or on the what I'm calling an orphan, which is the form with not in a tab panel. That's the end of the code.
Excellent. Well, that's yeah. Well, if you can't see how much work, that's a lot of work. Let's just leave it there. A lot of nuances that you have to cover to make something like Slickgrid work in Servoy very transparently. And so that we're throwing this out on a Friday afternoon teaser, and this is what we've been up to. If you like it, shoot us an email. Hey, you want it? Shoot us an email. We're not, I don't know, Troy. We it's a ton of work. We're using it for our own clients. We'd love to get some other people using this as well if they're thinking about web client for Servoy. And why wouldn't you be? I mean, Smart Client certainly is the best Servoy client there is, but it's certainly getting a bad hit in terms of Java, being Java-based. Every 3 or 4 months there seems to be a Java sucks thread going on. It doesn't work on Macs anymore, or there's something or other. So Java, whether it's fortunate or whether it's their fault or not, is just getting bad press right and left. So to get to the web client, we're working hard on making web client Servoy something really cool, and we think we're pretty close there with this. Slickgrid is a huge deal for us. So I hope you like this video, and Troy, thank you for that.
Cheers.
Yeah, man. And we will talk to you guys all later. Slickgrid component for Servoy.